Good afternoon. Tuesday afternoon, March 5th, 2019. Welcome to the Clemson Dubcast. Apologies for no episode last week. Actually had a planned guest for Friday fall through. I won't name who it is. Don't want to call him out. But I got to admit, I felt incomplete and uncomfortable having gone through a week without providing another Dubcast. I know that some of you on the website at tigerillustrated.com and also on social media have been asking, hey, where's the latest one? You know, we pared it down from two a week to one once weekly after the new year, and then having it non-existent last week was no fun. So apologies for that, and we are actually hoping to have two this week to make up for lost time and to give you your, well, no money, to give you your attention's worth. Got quite a few listeners down in Aiken. Made the trip down there last week, the yearly trip that I usually make in February to speak to the great folks of the Aiken Clemson Club, and quite a few of them listened to the podcast, gave away a few of the Dubcast koozies. Also, quite a few folks down there bought the most recent book, Dabo's Dynasty, Clemson's Rise to Football Supremacy. It's been selling really well. If you'd like to buy some copies with personalized autograph inscriptions and all that, you can go to ClemsonFootballBooks.com. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, huge fans. Also, they're responsible for those Clemson Dubcast koozies you might have seen around lately. Those have been a popular item, so really appreciate Parham Smith & Archenhold producing those. In addition to that, the forte of their law firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions, also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. For instance, they handled the Cleveland Park rollover case, also handled the GHS infection cases. Very complex stuff that they are highly trained to do, and they're in the business to help people. Parham Smith & Archenhold offers free consultations, so you can call them at 864-990-4581 or go to parhamlaw.com. Business owners in the upstate and beyond, I want to tell you about Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, changing the face of payment processing. Office is located throughout the Southeast. One of the owners of the Greenville location, 2005 Clemson grad. If you're a business owner, you know how painful it is to get the weekly phone calls from the national processing companies promising, quote, the lowest rates in the industry. Tandem approaches this part of it completely differently, face-to-face. The newest program they offer is called Cash Discount. You can eliminate up to 100% of your annual credit card processing fees. The best part of it is it encourages more cash transactions inside your business. Plus, you save the typical processing fees you pay annually. Call Tandem today to learn more about how to eliminate your credit card processing fees. 864-672-1570. That's 1570 or tandempayment.com. All right, let's get to our conversation with the one and only Pete Yanity. He is in the midst of massive preparations for this week's Southern Conference basketball tournament, so we'll get into that with him, and we won't take too much of his time because he's got quite the load this week preparing for that. So really appreciate Pete sharing his time with us. Going to talk about a lot of stuff, including the winding road of his career as the voice of the Tigers, and then what he's doing now, and quite a lot of stuff. So hope y'all enjoy. Okay, joined by Pete Yanity, who is neck deep in SoCon basketball tournament preparation. Am I right?
At this very moment, Larry, 18 schools in the SoCon because there are only 8 women's teams, not 10. So I'm getting ready for, if those listening to this ahead of Thursday, the 7th of March, I'm getting ready for 15 games in 4 days. But by gosh, I say if they made it 16 or 17 or 20 or whatever, I'd be good to go. So excited for that. It's always a fun thing to do each and every year.
When do you head to Asheville?
I will go up Wednesday. I'll go up for a women's prep day. There'll be practices so I can visit with some of the coaches, and then I'll be there in earnest from Thursday through Sunday night. I've got the benefit. I do a weekly game of the week for the Southern Conference on the men's side. So, and the goal was we got every team on at least once. And I've been doing Southern Conference games now for 5 seasons in various iterations, forms, and on various platforms. And so I've gotten to know the league really well, and what a great basketball league it is. On the men's side, if you're women's side, Mercer's kind of the dominant team now. But on the men's side, you'll find few mid-major conferences that have as much depth and quality within the top 4 teams as in this league.
You've covered the biggest sporting events that exist: Super Bowls, Final Fours, Masters, of course, Clemson's yearly trips to the college football playoff. Do you get as, I guess, juiced up when you're having to bone up for VMI versus the Citadel in a conference champion or conference tournament game?
I've been asked before something like that, and I've also offered my thoughts on that unsolicited before. And I'm being brutally frank with you here. Brutally frank with you. I literally take every single event. I prepare for every event the exact same way as if it's my own personal Super Bowl. And that's Elon against Clemson soccer. That's, a TV game, whether it was a big Clemson game when I was doing radio or when it was a minimal Clemson game. If it was Savannah State against Clemson men's basketball, I got ready for that with as much ardor and trying to have as many details as I could about the other team and updates on the Clemson team as I did for a Clemson-Florida State game when that series was vibrant. So, yeah, I love it. I just everything about the whole doing the live game thing on TV or radio, I embrace, and I just really try to prepare really hard.
I had Wes Durham on a couple months ago, and it was fascinating hearing his process for preparation. And it needs to be pointed out, and we pointed out then that, if you're somebody like me, I try to prepare for games, but if a writer wanted to, he or she could fake it. You could go to a game without knowing really much of anything about the other team, and you could write a coherent, pretty good story or column after the game, and nobody knows that you didn't spend any time preparing for it. As opposed to your job, it's a train wreck if you don't spend a lot of time preparing for it. Do you have? Yeah. I'm sure you have this. I guess not a formula, but how long it takes you to prepare for each game. What is that number, if there is a precise number?
I have what I call a cone of preparation, and for every game, and there are different, for example, if I've got 2 games, I've had days where I've had 2 games on the same day, and so I prepare leading into those. I often have deals on a weekend where I'll have a game on a Saturday, game on a Sunday, depending on what time of the year it is, but the actual minutes spent on, and what I have is, and I'm sure Wes and others have it, maybe, I don't know, he's in a different stratosphere than I, but I have a computer program that I use, and I've got these charts. And it's actually, interestingly, it's an architectural program, so I could conceivably design a wing on my house with this as well as get it, ready for a game. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, and so I have a database basically. And so, for example, when you do something like Clemson, I always had a home chart. I always had a chart for Clemson that I would just add teams for different games or whatever. For a Southern Conference deal, in week 1, I had Mercer Wofford this season. So then I had Wofford like 3 or 4 more times so I could continue to go back, revise that. But I have a really intricate process. Yes, in what I do, I try, and I use this term, and it's probably used a lot by baseball pitchers. I try to trust my stuff. I make a chart. I have specific details. It's really kind of training, like anything else in that involves, physical energy, and calling a game involves a certain kind of physical energy. Writing a story after the game involves a certain kind of physical energy, as tweeting during a game does. But anyway, I try to trust my stuff. I set my charts up so that my eyes know where to go. So if a steal happens, I know immediately. I know where that player is on my little chart in front of me. I know where the steals category is. If a kid hits 3 threes in a row, okay, I know. On my stat monitor, I can update what he's done for the game, but my eyes also know where to go. Like Francis Alonso, really good 3-point shooter for UNCG. They're going to play in round 2 on Saturday. If he gets hot, I'll be able to know where to go on my chart to see what his season 3-point total is. Plus, on my chart, which I'll study arduously the night before they play, I'll know that as a sophomore, he was 3rd in the country at just over 46% in 3-pointers. So those are the kind of things I'll throw in there to try to set up my analyst to then follow up with a thought about, he's a little bit down this year, but whatever. So I have a certain intricate process of preparation that I follow, and I've pretty much really took it. Yeah, I did a bunch of play-by-play in high school and college in the early 80s into the mid 80s, and then got into the business. And the first job I got was a 611 sports job. And after 6 months was a weeknight guy. And so, did that for about 15 years, really didn't do much play-by-play. Late 90s, got back into it. Early 2000s, when I got into Clemson, I realized I needed to, kind of reformulate my whole process from 15, almost 20 years before. And then I've kind of just grown it and adapted it now since I've been really back in the full play-by-play mode for coming up on almost 20 years again now.
You said an architecture program.
It's called Microsoft Visio. And, I don't know when Microsoft invented it, but by God, I'm happy that they do. And so it's similar in many respects to what I used to draw by hand, because realize when I was a play-by-play guy the first time around in the 80s, computers were only those, big things and you might have like a PC in some of the newsrooms I worked in a newspaper in the early 80s for a couple of years as a freelance guy, and also as a summertime sports editor. But then in the newsroom in college and my radio and TV stations, we finally got desktop PCs, but obviously it was nothing like what we would have today. So I started working with Clemson's radio network in 2001 as a scoreboard show guy, and I was doing TV tape delay that fall, but I was just still doing my handmade charts that I'd make by hand and get my little ruler out and draw my lines, to put player numbers and their names and measurements. And then I did that in 2001 for about 6 or 7 games, and I think the only play-by-play I did in 2001 was that football season, some tape delay on CSS, and then I think I did maybe a couple of baseball games or I did some baseball and basketball during that winter and spring. But anyway, 2002, I don't do any play-by-play in football because I became the sideline guy for Clemson's network, and then of course 2003, and suddenly I become the play-by-play guy a few games into the football season because of the sudden death of Jim Phillips. And so I for the first game I did down at Georgia Tech in September of 2003, I did my typical, what I had always deferred to. And we go into our booth, and Auburn had played there the week before. And they left their little charts. Their play-by-play guy left his charts behind. I'm like, this looks really good, and I kind of need to adapt up to this. So I called the guy the next day down at Auburn, and I said, hey, where'd you get that deal? And he told me. So I went over to the place that sells these kind of things, and I bought my little Microsoft Visio thing, installed it on my computer, and it's the same thing I still use many iterations later, and I've kind of refined it to what makes it work for me.
Memorization is so important to your job. Do you find that you bring your work home with you in that way, and that maybe you're lying awake at night going, oh gosh, what's number 12's name again?
Not like that. What I do is, and again, when I was doing football on the radio, especially, because obviously radio and TV are 2 completely different disciplines. TV, you're fortifying the pictures. Honestly, the job, this is my opinion, the job of, if I'm doing my job well as a good TV play-by-play guy, the first thing I can do the most is set up the color analyst to really give depth and perspective to what folks are saying. So my biggest fear, the nightmare that I would have when I was doing radio was a defensive back or a linebacker would make a pick six and be returning it, and I wouldn't immediately have a number name recall. And on radio, something I learned really early at a really young age, the only time you should ever say a number is for emphasis. Like, Jacoby Ford would score a touchdown. I'd say, it's 6 for number 6 or something like that. But radio, it's all fluid. Radio, again, you're literally you're your own director, producer, play-by-play guy. See what I'm saying? And you're trying to set up your color analyst, but it's a different way to set up the color analyst. So that was my fear. So for football, for example, I try to commit to memory anyone who could touch the ball. So basically, I rarely ever knew a number of an offensive lineman for the opposing team. The only time you're ever going to mention a lineman for the opposing team is if he goes down with an injury. And of course, the color analyst may point it out that person got burned, on the previous sack. But anyone who could potentially touch the ball, I try to commit. But again, it goes back to, I'm not only getting to know names and numbers. And when you do a team, obviously, then that's all fluid. You know what I mean? With Clemson, after the first game of the year in football, any newcomers, I immediately, if I didn't already have them pretty much committed to memory from, watching a practice or going to, like, I used to go to all the Saturdays, as many as I could get to, at least one of them, but if not a couple of the ones they have in August in the stadium, I'd always go to those and be studying guys. And also, Nuke Hopkins and Sammy Watkins, that was a nightmare because they both wore curvy numbers that were single digits and the hair was very similar. So anyway, so you try to pick up tendencies like, well, one's wearing an orange wristband on his left, wrist and the other's not. But here's the deal. So what I try to do, though, I try to know on the chart where the guys are. And so therefore, in other words, if I know number 6 is upper right of the chart, okay, and if number 6 for the opposing team is a wide receiver, it's, Joe Smith, but every so often in the course things, just know upper right, I got number 6, upper left, I've got number, 7 and 84, and I've got 6 and 43 and, 85 on the upper right. So just things like that, and you just kind of flow through it. And that's just kind of been the method of my madness. That's in terms of football. Basketball is kind of like a table game. Basketball is wonderful because it's just all sitting right there in front of you. And I honestly go off faces as much, if not as much, numbers. And of course, you have the benefit of someone right in front of you see a last name. And so you might see the last name Thompson, and then you realize Amanda Thompson, she's a really good player for Mercer's women, for example. So there are just a lot of little things you just kind of pick up over the years. What works for you? There's no set plan. What works for one may not work for another. But at the end of the day, you hope it all comes out the right way. You've
been the sports director for WSPA since 1990, correct?
October 29th, 1990 was my first day in the office.
I mean, that job by itself is enough, or could be viewed as enough for most people. Why are you? But you're always doing a bunch of different things. Why is that? Are you just? I
am, yeah. And I've been a 6 and 11 weeknight sports guy professionally since March 17th of 1986. And before that, I got out of college in June of 85. 2 months later, I got my first job at the CBS affiliate in Florence as the weekend guy, and I was there for exactly 6 months. And then March of 86, February of 86, a station in West Virginia gave me a call. They're an NBC affiliate. A buddy of mine who I'd known from college was working there. He gave me my name. They decided to hire me. So, and I love everything I do at Channel 7 and have done. And I loved before that everything I did as a weekday guy at WBTW in Florence from 87 to 90 when I returned there. And before that, I was for 364 days, 10 hours and 22 minutes. I was a weekday guy at the NBC affiliate in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Great experience. It's just I was there for a year, and the station in Florence asked me to come back and be the weekday guy. But I really love that. I love all that we do. I work hard at the job. I always have, even with all the freelance stuff. My initial focus is always on making sure that I'm taking care of things on the Channel 7 side, and I kind of, I kind of base everything in terms of my timing and everything around that. That is a part of my career that has evolved and changed over the years in terms of what's asked of me in terms of time-wise within the newscast, to in terms of travel for that job and what we go do and what we don't do. And we used to do a lot of things and cover them extensively that we just don't anymore. And that's just kind of the evolution of the whole media business. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, things change. You got to evolve. I produce a show much differently on a nightly basis right now than I probably did 5 years ago, and certainly drastically differently than I did maybe 15 years ago. It's just kind of that. But that's enough. My first love is being a play-by-play guy, doing live events. So in the mid-'90s, having been at Channel 7 for as long as I had been, at that point, I'd been there for about 6 or 7 years, and I realized I needed more to fortify my career. And mind you, I've got a wonderful wife, and our kids were just being born then, but professionally, I needed to be doing more. I just felt like I had more to give to the business. I always felt like I was born to be in this business and do all the things that I've been doing. And I just needed more, and some opportunities started to come about, and, they kind of grew from there. But, yeah, and you mentioned something earlier about, do I take the memorizing of games home with me? I mean, there's a really weird, blurry line between my personal life and my professional life. It really is. And I'm pretty much working from the time I get up, whether it's just making sure I'm on top of certain stories I need to be following and covering, to getting ready for that next game I've got coming up. And, when I was doing the Clemson thing, every May was my prep for the football season. Because then everyone had gotten spring football done. So I'd go through every opponent coming up, and I'd spend about 3 or 4 days on each opponent, putting a chart together for them that I would then update with stats when that game came. But that kind of was part of the yearly ritual. So I'd spend May getting a dummy chart up on every team that we'd play, so I'd be ready to go once that game week came along, and I would just have to then update, notes and that kind of thing.
You mentioned that producing a sportscast is a lot different than it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. How so?
It's, for example, time-wise. I mean, there was a time when I'd fill 5 minutes on a weeknight show, either 6 or 11, and a lot of that got reduced down. I'll usually fill between 3 and 3.5 minutes on an early newscast, which is a pretty good increment in this day and age, with the irony being that, we do more local newscasts than ever. And then in a late show, depending on which channel it's on, because we have 2 different channels, that we do newscasts on, both Channel 7 and then the CW 62. So I might get 4 minutes on one of the late shows and about 3:15, 3.5 on the other one. The use of the scoreboard has almost completely been eliminated, other than if, like, Clemson's playing a 9 o'clock basketball game and we're doing our 10 o'clock show. We abide by the rules that are in place. And so that's occasionally when we'll use a scoreboard. If Clemson and South Carolina are playing 4 o'clock in the afternoon baseball games on a 6 o'clock show, we'll just show a scoreboard of that. That's a huge difference. Always have been a very locally oriented, but people that live here care about national sports. But I've been hammered into me over the years in the business. No, just worry about local. Well, you've got to acclimate some national stuff. But in the old days, to fill more time, I might do more national stuff at that time, within the show, and more extensive national stuff. Now it's just a headline, and then again, the magical thing that we all live off of, the internet, has impacted some of the things we do. Some of the questions we ask, some of the things we know about. I would hazard to say 10 or 15 years ago, you never would have known about a hard screen set 75 feet from the basket, for example, in an intramural basketball game. So that gets maybe touched on as a subject matter. So there are just a lot of things, just things evolve. And from a technical standpoint, in terms of producing the show, we have more bells and whistles at our fingertips now than we ever have. So I'll do some things differently than I used to do, or I would have to rely on someone else to do. I can now do them myself. Content-wise, since the time I've been in the state, and contrary, of course, to what you might see on social chatter, whether I was over in the Florence Myrtle Beach market or here in the upstate, I've always my core has always been Clemson and South Carolina, right up there side by side, cover them as best we can. Obviously, the other college teams, whatever the market, depending on the interest. In Florence, quite frankly, at the time, Coastal Carolina was a fledgling D1 team. I actually did their TV show in the late 80s for 3 years, their basketball TV show. But, there were certain dynamics in each market. So up here, when I first got up here, Furman was the only other Division I team. Things changed drastically in the mid-90s when Wofford went D1. So then that changed how we cover things, because we used to essentially cover the Division II schools. Now, sadly, the coverage is almost non-existent because over the years, of course, USC Upstate's gone Division I, Presbyterian's gone Division I. So now we basically have 6 Division I teams we need to give attention to. And so there's only so much time and only so many resources. Just those are some of the backgrounds. Then obviously after the college stuff, we cover high schools. We're huge on covering the high schools. And then NASCAR, Carolina Panthers, Atlanta Braves, and other things kind of fall in line.
Okay, so you did the sideline Clemson gig for a year,
Yep.
The season before Jim Phillips passed away.
Yep.
Can
that
you
is true.
take us back to after his passing and just your recollections and what was going through your head and what that was like for you?
Very strange time. So the 2003 season begins, which of course was the 5th year for Tommy Bowden. Unbelievable expectations. You got the feeling that Tommy Bowden had made Clemson football cool again. Highly regarded national ranking, opening game against the Georgia Bulldogs, a noon game. I think it was nationally televised on ABC or ESPN. Crystal clear, beautiful day in Death Valley. Couldn't ask for anything more. And Georgia wins 30-0. And interesting little aside, one of my recollections of that day. So as the sideline guy, and this is my second year now beginning as a sideline guy, and what I used to have to do as a sideline guy, as soon as the game was over, I'd go underneath, the west end zone, as we used to know, with that big set of bleachers, and then the little locker rooms were underneath there, the game day locker rooms were underneath there, and then I'd go into the separate side, like coach's room, and I'd wait for Tommy Bowden, and I would put the headphones on him and give him my mic so that Jim Phillips and the color analyst up in the booth, and that was actually the first game for someone named Will Merritt as the color analyst. So anyway, they would do the Tommy Bowden interview, and then when they were done doing that, I'd get the microphone and headsets back, and then in another segment of the post-game show, I'd go interview the coordinators. So anyway, but one of my recollections of that 03 season, just to take in a different tangent, was sitting in that locker room waiting for the coaches coming in thinking, wow, this is going to be a lot of fun after what just happened in the field. And one of the first people to walk in that locker room was a man who just completed his first game as a Clemson assistant, who looked like he'd been run over by a freight train, someone named William Sweeney, who goes by Dabo. I'll never forget the look in his face. He and David Blackwell had just been on the sidelines for their first Clemson game as assistant coaches, and each guy just looked like, wow, just this look of disappointment. I just always remember the look in Dabo's face when he walked in. It was just one of those you just kind of remember. Anyway, so lose that game the next week, kind of struggle against Furman at home. It was one of those 3 p.m. games, and you just, it's just a lousy feeling at the stadium because everyone was just angry about what had happened the week before, the fan base and that kind of thing. And, I think won that game 28-14, went up to the Carolina Panthers game that Sunday. That was their season opener, and that's when they had Rodney Peete as their starting quarterback. Starts the 2003 year. They're down 17-0 at the half. They go to Jake Delhomme at halftime, come back and win the game. And I remember being down there at the end of that game, and then you just remember. And then so that Monday night passes, and that Tuesday morning I get a 7:30 phone call at my house from our assignment editor. And she probably didn't realize, God bless her, wonderful woman who calls me, and she probably didn't realize my relationship with Jim Phillips, that I worked with the guy. I'd known the guy, for over 15 years, basically from the time I'd been in the market. But I think I'd met him when I was in Florence and would come up and cover Clemson games. And she goes, we hear the Clemson announcer Jim Phillips has passed away. We were wondering if you know some people we could call, to get comment on. And I think my reaction was, well, you're talking to one of them, and I'm just shocked to hear the news. And so, really weird day. And of course, that was a Tuesday morning, and it was ahead of the Middle Tennessee game. So that was, one that I was heading over to Clemson anyway to do interviews. And as a sideline guy, I also did a pregame show. So the Tuesdays were a really busy day for me because I was getting a bunch of interviews, to produce a pregame show for. So it was really weird. And I didn't know what happened. And I assure you that I always wanted to get back involved with, live game situations. As I told you, in the mid 90s, that itch to do, something more. And earlier in that decade, I'd done the Clemson, coaches shows for 2 years. I was in the middle of a 12-year run doing Wofford's football shows. I just loved doing side things. It just was but I really wanted to get back in the booth and do play-by-play. I obviously never wanted it to evolve like that. Very strange day. The guys at the local network office took me to lunch. I wasn't going to ask questions. I was literally, again, my whole thought when I started working with the Clemson radio network, I had no idea where the thing was going. I just they started me as a post-game show guy. The second year they added a pre-game show. I always did the halftime show. And then they made me the sideline guy. I just wanted to be the best I could. I was hoping maybe they'd add a pre-game show for basketball eventually that I could do, whatever. So I am in my satellite truck that night, doing live shots that Tuesday, so for the news, Jim Phillips passing away was a very big story for obvious reasons. So I did live shots in Death Valley. I was given information. I'd be getting a phone call. And then that night I'm driving away from Clemson after doing the early newscast. And I get a call from the fellow who ran our local network. The way it works is Learfield at the time owned the rights. So they put a local office in Clemson, and they've got a sales team there that sells the spots, tries to make their money back for the rights fee they pay. So I was right in front of the Bosco Bell golf course. And he's like, "Hey, you still in town?" I said, "Well, I'm heading back right now." He goes, "Well, can you just come visit with me real quick?" I was like, "Fine." So I did a U-turn right there on Highway 76. Meet him in his office. He sits me down. He goes, "We want you to do the football play-by-play for the rest of the season. We also want you to do basketball." And I was kind of surprised. Basketball. I'm like, wow, this is, and the whole thing was kind of odd because with football and my Channel 7 job, I could work all that in with the Channel 7 job as kind of a weekend thing. But I'm, thinking, okay, well, I'll figure it out. I'd love to, it's just going to be on an interim basis. I said, fine, I'm just going to do the best job I can and then do the best I can to honor the memory of Jim. And so that's kind of how that happened. So the following Saturday, at the request of his family, Tim Bray did the game. Folks remember that. I was told, look, we don't want you to do sidelines for this game. Just sit in the booth, watch how it goes. And I'm, whatever, that's fine. I'll just lay out during the game. I was familiar with how things worked in the booth, but that was fine. But one of the most amazing moments I experienced during my time in broadcasting, and this is one of those top 10 moments of memory, whether it was good, bad, indifferent, but it was an amazing moment, a wonderful moment. And fans will remember that Bob Fulton, the late legendary former South Carolina play-by-play guy and a longtime friend of Jim's, came in and called a series, which was actually a Clemson scoring drive, which was pretty, Middle Tennessee was hanging around in the game, and then that was a big scoring drive for Clemson. But just sitting and I didn't say a word, I didn't say anything on the air. I think I may have done the halftime show, and then I did the post-game scoreboard show. But just experiencing that moment up close with Bob Fulton in there, very emotional for Bob, obviously. And that was an amazing moment. That was a really, really interesting. It was one of the most interesting moments in my broadcasting career, and I didn't say a word. And I just observing that, just being in the back of that booth and watching that, and watching Bob's emotions and all of that. It was really, really a special time. And then the following week, September 20th of 2003, in Atlanta, 7 p.m. game, and a very odd occurrence even for then. It would never happen today. Clemson at Georgia Tech to open up the ACC. And so it's a 2-1 Clemson team that had lost the opener to Georgia, had knocked off a couple of teams at home you'd expect them to knock off. Now the ACC opener at Georgia Tech, which was, they were they were what they were. Chan Gailey was still there, and they were a good enough team. And, here we go. It began then. And, Clemson wins 39-3. Whitehurst throws to Kevin Youngblood for the first touchdown, and it just kind of set the tone. I think it was Whitehurst to Youngblood, but just a real quick jump out to the lead, and it was just a neat game, but no TV, and it's in Atlanta. It's 7:00 night game. So there was a huge crowd of Clemson folks in that upper deck to the left where they sit the visitors. But it's like, all right, well, folks are going to be listening in. So, cast my lot, and then it took off from there.
All right. And then when did you learn that you had the job for good?
April of 2004, after the season ended, the various processes, I had to kind of, do some convincing on the Channel 7 end. The Clemson Athletic folks were gracious to speak up on my behalf in that regard, as were the Learfield folks. And so April of 2004 is when things got settled that we would move forward, and then that went on for another decade.
The newest sponsor to the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, they've been family-owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy, employs Clemson folks. Harris Flooring offers a unique shopping experience through value in their services, developing the right product solutions for your home or business, and delivering on their promises. They serve the residential and commercial segments. They've done a lot of work for Clemson, both the athletics department and the university side. I remember last October when Dabo Sweeney came over to visit with us for the 10th anniversary series. He went over at the McFadden building, the old football coach's offices for that. He looks down at the carpet and goes, "Man, they got the same carpet that was here when I was here. This is crazy." Well, that's about to change because the McFadden building is undergoing a substantial renovation, and Harris Flooring America is responsible for replacing all the carpet and tile over there. So Dan Radakovich and his staff over there and everybody else is about to be outfitted with some really nice new digs, including the flooring. For you homeowners out there, Harris also offers floor-to-ceiling design capabilities. So give them a call, 864-642-6183, or on the internets at www.flooringamerica-anderson.com. Harris Flooring America. Okay, so moving forward, on one hand, you're still trying to do the job you've always done as the sports director for a TV station, which requires you to go and cover both Clemson and South Carolina during the week. But then on the other hand, you're a Clemson guy, or at least viewed as such, as the play-by-play guy. You're getting paid by him, I guess, indirectly. How hard was that, I guess, to navigate the perceptional sort of line? I'm sure that some Gamecock folks viewed you permanently as a Clemson fan or a Clemson guy,
sure,
or whatever.
Yeah.
From that point, can you sort of enlighten us on the difficulties or the sort of the balance of those two?
Yeah. Interesting line to walk. Pre-Twitter in 2003, social media web boards were the big thing. I got crucified on the South Carolina side, and frankly, folks like to express themselves. I'm a big fan of the First Amendment, and I welcome any expression. If someone has an issue with anything I've done on TV, and then they reach out to me, the first thing I thank them for reaching out. I don't care if they hate me or don't like it. I'd much rather hear from them than them just make assumptions, hear my side of things, and then they can determine what they want to determine. If it had been 10 years later and the Twitter and the Facebook stuff had all been at a higher level of participation or existed, nonetheless, I don't know how much worse it would have been, but it was the fact that I started working with the network in 2001 drew some ire. And at the time I was a little bit surprised because in the early 90s, as a result of a business dealing between my station and the rights holder at the time with Clemson, I hosted Ken Hatfield and Cliff Ellis's TV shows for 2 years and produced them and all that kind of thing. And I didn't sense much outcry back then, but it's just, it was different, I guess, being fully associated now with the network. My whole policy on the whole thing, and again, I get up every day, I walk into every office, I arrive at every game. I want to have the best broadcast, telecast, sportscast that I can have. And by doing that, I hope that a fan from either team will feel informed. With Clemson, as their play-by-play guy, I tried to know as much about the opposing team as I could to throw in interesting, items, A, to enlighten the regular Clemson listener, B, if the NC State fan was stuck listening to me for whatever reason, I at least hope to give them some insight on their team and some perspective and that kind of thing. When it was a broadcast on the radio network, I've never been a we and an us kind of guy. A, because I'm not the one out there sweating and toiling and, getting knocked around. But more importantly, I'd like to think you always knew it was a Clemson broadcast if you tuned in. Just as on Channel 7, I'd like to think you knew that it was a CBS affiliate in the upstate of South Carolina doing its due diligence, not always with the number of resources and having to pull a lot of strings together and pull the deerskin over the drum, so to speak, to get things done, but doing its due diligence. And maybe the best resolve or the best quotient I can tell you to kind of put all that in a nutshell is when my run with Clemson ended in 2014, I heard from a lot of folks from a lot of different places, but I heard a consistent vibe, either directly or indirectly, from folks who pull for South Carolina. And it was a bit, if nothing else, it kind of gave me a little bit of peace with myself, is that, if you watched him on Channel 7, you never knew he was Clemson's play-by-play guy. And that was by design. And again, I'm not into the politics of the whole thing. I'm really not. And I'm, again, if I can do the very best telecast as possible. Okay. The very first game I'll do this Thursday is Mercer in Western Carolina. Mercer has won 34 straight regular season women's games in the SoCon. They're defending champs. Western Carolina took an over this year in conference play. We know how that game's probably going to go, but I will try to be as diligent as I can representing each side in that game and just trying to tell the stories as they unfold. So back to the whole Clemson Carolina thing. Yeah, well, I'm doing Clemson's games, and so the Clemson listener is going to have a certain expectation when they tune into their network. And I've never really tried to beat anybody up on either side of the fence, and so I tried just to tell it like it was, describe it as best I could, let the analysts, tell me what just happened from an expert standpoint, and do a really good show. And that's how I always approached it. Folks will hear what they want to hear. They will have their preconceptions. They will have their rooting interests. God bless all of them. And I hope they do that with ardor and vigor. Certain darts were thrown my way that I don't think were accurate, but all you can do is all you can do. And at the end of the day, I think your performance and the product you've put out will speak volumes, much more than you can speak directly yourself.
What about it from the perspective of, from the Clemson point of view, like from the coach's point of view? I mean, they don't have a very nuanced view of media and play-by-play. I mean, if you're the play-by-play guy, you're one of us, you're an in-house guy, blah, 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 is usually their view of it.
Sure.
And yet you're there on Tuesdays at Tommy Bowden's press conferences. And actually that year, a couple of months after.
That was the infamous post-Wake Forest, pre-Florida State moment.
Yeah, like you got guys like Phil Kornblut is the one that's most memorable when he said, Tommy,
in your heart of hearts, do you feel like you're going to be back as a head coach next year? And my perception wasn't a gotcha question. It didn't sound like it at the time.
No.
And I had kind of tried to get that vibe from Mr. Bowden myself in our various, post-game visits when we would tape his TV show. And would continue to do that in the following weeks to be used in the appropriate way at the appropriate time. So, I looked at, in attacking everything that I attack, I'm always basically trying to, meet a deadline or, fill a content mark. So when I arrived at those Tuesday news conferences, okay, this is the opponent. These are the players to bring in. I'll interview these guys. I've kind of got some story ideas in place. I'll maybe ask questions based on, what I think would be interesting to talk about this year's game against, say, Duke, okay, or based on what happened the past week and how they're going to get better at, stopping the run because they face a better running team. That's what I ask the players. In terms of asking either Tommy or Dabo, whoever, I'd be asking questions to, you just kind of, you have an idea as to what the game presents that week. But I mean, here's the deal. I don't think, I hope this isn't the case, that any Clemson coach I ever dealt with, I'd like to think they felt comfortable with me. I was never told otherwise. I never got the impression otherwise. I'd like to think they saw me as their play-by-play guy who did the best he could. I mean, they're not listening to the game. Obviously, they might hear as they're walking to the parking lot after the game, if, a post-game show is being played on speakers, they might hear replays of the calls. I never tried to beat anybody up. And, I had to do post-game interviews live on radio and tape for TV and that kind of thing, whether they won or they lost. And you just kind of try to deliver the best message possible. And again, we, at my core, at your core, at all of our core, we're simply trying to inform people. And I'm not trying to, get into here's information. I hope you feel bad hearing. See what I'm saying? That's never been, it's just been, here's the deal. We're all curious. We're all fans of something, and we're all curious to know why something happened or how somebody feels. So that was all my basis. But I never felt any I just kind of always just attacked what I had to attack in terms of getting the job done, and just attacked the mission at that moment and attacked the preparation at that moment. And so I felt complete comfort and working both sides in terms of working at a TV station and working at, and calling games, that there was this underlying cynicism from some about, how dare he have the audacity to do that? Well, there were a lot of people around the country that folks didn't realize did the exact same thing that I grew up watching. And there are a lot of places around the country where you've got two teams that get a lot of attention, but there's really not hatred. They're just kind of like, okay, they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. And so I tried not to get caught up in it. I really didn't. And I always sensed it, but look, I mean, it's so beyond anything that I had time to even worry about.
Yeah. I guess what I was getting at was, like, say, there's a controversy of the week or something, and you're at a press conference with Tommy Bowden or whoever. Do you feel any more trepidation than normal to go ahead and ask the question about that particular controversy, and maybe out of some concern that the coach would maybe get irked based on your, I guess, affiliation as the play-by-play guy? Yeah,
no, because I think if you ask a question in a reasonable way, in a logical way, as long as you're not, trying to make an implication in a question. And I'll give you two examples of that, or a few examples of that. Now, again, the question that induced what's been, termed the lip quiver, I didn't ask that question, but I'll guarantee you that ran on the news that night. Okay. 2011 in preparation for ACC Championship Week, I was actually at a function in Columbia. I wasn't even on the air that night, but there was a pretty famous rant after a practice. Well, that ran in our news that night. I was at a Dabo news conference earlier this season, and for the last couple of years, I've been back in the fold in the TV iteration. Had been doing some TV games before the past couple of years, but I produced and I co-host the basketball and the TV, football and basketball TV shows. And I simply asked the question after the whole Kelly Bryant thing, because I think it's the question that I thought, honestly, others would ask it, and maybe they didn't feel like they needed to. I just kind of felt like, because I thought it was a pretty obvious thing, is that, well, you got to the semifinals last year with Kelly Bryant. You've got a freshman who is rated highly coming out of high school, higher than Kelly was, and you drawn the logical conclusion with, no inhibitions, with other than just the obvious, point A to point B conclusion that to win a national title, this is probably the quarterback that gets us there. So I, as politely as I could, asked the question, and immediately that response was with great intensity, and one emphasizing the focus is on winning the division and nothing else. Well, I think to their credit, because they've and one man in particular, the head coach, has gotten the football program to the level that he has, that it's fair to recognize that they're targeting and shooting for the stars every year as well they should. They built such a great program to do that. So I asked that question. So therefore, well, I co-host the TV show. Now, I'm not the play-by-play guy, but I just think that's a question that I think was probably on a lot of folks' minds. I mean, was at the root of this decision. It was obviously there was nothing other than feeling like you had the best guy in the freshman as opposed to the guy who, was the returning starter.
I laughed earlier at the lip quiver recollection because the most memorable part of that, other than the quiver, was the denial of the quiver. I guess about 5 hours later after practice, it became. I mean, it went viral as things could get back then, 2003. Sure. But it was a story at that point after practice, and I felt so bad for those. I think it was mostly print newspaper beat writers. Asked him about, Coach Bowden, you kind of broke down there today and he said, "What are you talking about?" Well, your lip kind of quivered. A quiver? What? He totally denied that it happened.
Yeah, and you know what? It might not have been. I mean, I don't know if he broke down or not. Only he knows if internally he was about to break down. But the fact is, what maybe folks don't realize about this, there was nearly a 30-second pause, at least 20-second pause from the end of the question, to the time. So it's just this very kind of awkward silence that you really weren't used to with him. And that's what I think it was the silence more than anything else that then drew the attention at that moment. Because other coaches, he's not the first coach that's ever been asked if he's worried about his job. And a lot of guys say, you know what, we'll address that after the season. I mean, heck, I don't know if you were even on the beat at that point. Maybe you were, 1998, and I've never felt more badly for an individual, but I guess it's a question that had to be asked in the post-game news conference. South Carolina loses to Clemson in Death Valley, Clemson team that finished 3-8, and of course South Carolina finishes 1-10 that year. And so, a few questions into his news conference, Brad Scott's asked, Brad, obviously it's, you worry about your future. And Brad immediately responded, look, what do you want me to say? You see what I'm saying? But there was no pause. So that's one example I can think of. But I think it was the very long pause from the time the question was asked to the time he answered that then just made everything else so apparent. If his lip was or wasn't quivering, or he was about to break down emotion or not, if he starts that answer with, you know what, Phil, I really don't know, then we probably never even talking about his emotions at the moment. Just, he looked somber in giving the answer. You see what I mean? But that's what it was. Just you're waiting. It's like, say something. You're just sitting there waiting for him to say something.
Okay, so 2014, I believe, second year athletics director Dan Radakovich has a different philosophy in mind. And correct me if I'm wrong here. You are given an opportunity to remain as working in football broadcasting in some capacity, and also remaining as the basketball play-by-play guy, but you elect not to. First of all, is all that accurate? And then second of all, how tough was that to no longer be the play-by-play guy?
I was offered to continue with basketball. I was told that there was that I wasn't going to be continuing, and the path he wanted to take was for me not to keep doing football, to continue doing basketball. I don't know if there was any other football opportunity. I didn't really ask. Just like anything else in business, I anticipated that might be something that was going to happen at the end of that season, and it was kind of difficult several months leading up to that. Very difficult time because I'm a doer. I'm a worker. This business is me. I am this business. This business has been very good to me. I think I've been very good to the business. Maybe I can be better at the business. Difficult moment, probably right there among the most difficult in my career. But that's some of that. You know what is some of that's maybe, at times I don't maybe step back and take a breath and whatever. But, look, we all like to have successes in life. At the same time, give Dan credit. A lot of guys might not have handled it. He was pretty nice in the whole process under the circumstances. I can't tell you that I agreed with it, but, you just got to kind of hold your head up. And I think sometimes in life, maybe we all just don't sit back and, let's just be nice and, appreciate that we get up every day and see the line of the trees against the sky. And so as it just was something that I initially didn't see coming. And then when the reality started to set in, it was a difficult time, but you know what, you just got to kind of try to bounce back and work through it and try to make some adjustments.
Okay, and then for the last, I guess, couple of years, WSPA has a partnership with Clemson's athletics department, whereby what are all your duties? I know you do pregame show, you do some stuff during the week. What all are you doing?
It's an interesting evolution of things, and then just to kind of connect some of the dots. So April of 2014 is when the conclusion is reached that I wouldn't be continuing with Clemson's radio network. Late April and early May is when the announcement came out in any capacity. And so, and then, I thought the most important thing for me was just to kind of step aside, look at what other opportunities I could find, and just, let that whole thing kind of just move down the river. Didn't really do anything around Clemson for the next several months. That's when the whole Southern Conference thing and some other opportunities started to begin slowly swirling on the TV side. March out of the blue, March of 2014, I'm asked to come back and call a baseball game at Clemson for ESPN3 against Notre Dame, and thought, what the heck, why not? So I went and did that. And then 15, 16, just me kind of being out in orbit, through the Southern Conference stuff. And interestingly, I was the Panthers sideline guy for 13 years, and a week after the Clemson thing ended in the spring of 2014, our TV station lost that contract for the first time since the team had come into the league. And so through a business deal, that little run ended too. So that was, I had a really lousy late April, early May of 2014. But anyway, so 15, 16, start really growing the TV play-by-play freelance stuff. And Clemson invited me to do some basketball games. There's a couple of games in the Well that year. And, did some volleyball for the first time, did some soccer, just, delved into some other things with them TV-wise. 16, 17, started to grow, doing even more with them, doing more with the Southern Conference, whatever. May of 17, the news director, who also has a big hand in the programming at our TV station, calls me into his office. He goes, "You ever heard of JMI?" And for some reason, I immediately thought of a company that makes class rings for like high school kids. I don't know why.
Jostens?
Whatever. Jostens. I was thinking JMI and Jostens. I don't know why. And so he goes, "We're in the process of finalizing a deal. They're the new rights holder. We'll produce the TV shows and that kind of thing." And I'm thinking, well, this is really interesting. So, we put the proper mechanisms in place. I recognized that, I'd actually hosted the TV show or produced it in two different iterations. Early 90s for 2 years when I produced it and I hosted it. And producing it means you're formatting it, you're editing most or all of it, or overseeing, we could say it, you're, really carefully watching the content, how things are done, whatever. And I did both of those in the early 90s. From 03 to 14, I simply hosted it. I tried to contribute some pieces to it and offer some insight, but it was handled by a production company that was independent of Clemson or anything that I did with Channel 7. And then so now I'm going to come back and I'll produce it and also host it, co-host it. And then we hired a fellow at the TV station who's done a great job in his role as kind of, producing it, field producing it, gathering a lot of the content for it and so forth. So it was, just kind of try to fold back into that kind of move myself back more into covering the programs on a regular basis in some respects. With that came even more TV duties and some more opportunities on the TV side. And there is one of the really, in this ever-evolving world over the past decade, colleges with the expanses of league networks and so forth have all become pretty good content producers. And Clemson is an absolute marvel in the guy who runs their show, Rick Bagby, who just produces some wonderful stuff. And so started doing even more with him. And so it evolved. So that was the 17-18 school year, was doing those. And then last summer, an opportunity came my way, independent of the Channel 7 arrangement, to do the football tailgate show. And my football play-by-play on the TV side had kind of diminished just because, it's a really, especially when you're kind of just a free agent out there and kind of freelancing in different places and aren't fully affiliated with a team, things happen. They can come in waves or they can diminish, and just some dynamics of doing football play-by-play on TV that I'd done in the fall of 14, 15, and 16, that just kind of waned in the fall of 17, which it probably had to in many respects so that I could really focus on the first year of the Clemson TV show. And then, but anyway, the opportunity came to do the tailgate show, which that's the one thing on the Clemson network and being a color analyst I'd never done. So I thought, you know what, it'll fold in nicely to producing the TV show. And I've done many kinds of talk shows before on the radio, and obviously I've done the pregame and the halftime and the postgame shows when I was doing the play-by-play. But I thought I'd give it a try, and I tried to produce it maybe a little bit differently than it had been produced over the years. But I just did that and worked with just some really great people there, who were my co-hosts, Mark and Daja, and also Ashley, and then Jason and Zach are producers, and those are just among the many great people in my life. The fellow I mentioned who works with the Clemson TV show, John Burton, my colleague at Channel 7, Todd Summers, the many people I've worked with there. There's just all kind of part of what makes it all go for me. So, so I did that this past fall. So then here we are, and I've continued. The last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to basically be the main guy TV-wise for a lot of the sports, especially like the men's basketball games that are on ESPN3. I do those. I do a bunch of women's basketball. I'm doing, tons of baseball this spring. I did my share of soccer and volleyball in the fall. And so that's kind of where things sit at this moment in time from the Clemson standpoint.
Yeah. In, say, 1985, if 80,000 fans are coming to a Clemson game, probably 75,000 of them are listening to the radio on their way to the game.
Yep.
Even at their tailgates. Obviously, a lot different now, mainly because of the advent of television. Television sets at each tailgate. How does a pregame radio show adapt to the current sort of landscape of consumer habits?
I think the pregame radio show still had some viability because that's the thing. You've got a lot of folks who are driving to the game. Mm-hmm. And it just worked out this year that Clemson's played so many early games. It's, there's only so much game day you can watch at a tailgate show. I mean, at a tailgate party, there's only so much TV of a pregame TV show you're going to watch because it's feature stories. They're going in and out of commercial breaks. But I think you might be more inclined to keep listening to the radio show if you're listening to it when you're driving up in your car. And that's talking about home games. For road games, just like anything else, and honestly, in my existence as Clemson's radio play-by-play guy, I mean, the realities were setting in. I mean, it wasn't before long that, there were only a few football games. The last football game I think I ever did that wasn't on TV of some kind was the Utah State game in 2004. I think that's the last football game. And the last basketball game I did that wasn't on TV of some kind was probably around 2009. And then after that, they started streaming, and I could be wrong. It might have been even earlier than that. So you realized you were maybe only being, used in 10-minute periods. You were very big in people's cars. You were very much a highlight service, a clips to be played around the country, on different shows. You were that kind of thing. So, and, again, I am an unbelievably blessed individual. And going back to what we talked about earlier, for all that went down in April of 2014, I think the man upstairs has always looked out for me. And again, while that opportunity was one that I really loved and cherished, many other opportunities have come since then, and with the blessings and with a lot of the same faces, still around, just, doing different work, for those folks. And so everything in media changes. How the local 6 and 11 sports guy who, 1985, when I get into this business, cable penetration was becoming pretty significant. Satellite TV wasn't around. There was no internet. But 5 years before, basically, if you were doing sports 5 years before I got into the business commercially in 85, and I've been doing it for about 6 years before then in high school and college, for the most part, it was 3 local channels that were doing news. And, it was broadcast TV and there was radio. That was it. So my presence as a 6'11" sports guy, I've had to deal with that evolution. So I've had to deal with a lot of different things evolving in the media, as we all have during my career. It's just, again, just do the very best you can. So in a radio, I never went into a radio game thinking, wow, somebody might only be listening to me because it's late in the second quarter, they're having a party, and they were just sent to the grocery store because something, they needed 2 more bags of chips. And so they're going to listen to me for 10 minutes on the way back. I never thought about that. I was cognizant of that, and you recognize that, but you just kind of, my thought doing football was somebody's going to be raking the leaves today for about 3 hours, and I'm going to be, and that's how they're going to follow the game. And I'll have that person. That's probably my long-term listener. That's kind of how I looked at it. For basketball, somebody may be on a trip on I-95 or I-85 or something, and, they're going to be with us for a 2-hour stretch, and, they'll be listening for the better part of that. Maybe that's the long-term listener.
Have you ever been nervous? Do you ever get nervous on live radio or TV?
I lost that a long time ago. Every so often, just like anything else, you get kind of apprehensive because you're like thinking through things. At least I do. I don't know how other people are. I was blessed pretty early on in this business. Nervousness kind of left me. It was a bit daunting the first few minutes of the Clemson Georgia Tech game on September 20th of 2003. Because it was like 100 degrees in that stadium. It was just unbelievably hot. And so that was a little bit, and that was just so hot. But it's kind of like this is a new thing I'm doing. New in terms of the seat I'm sitting in was different in many respects. I'd done play-by-play before. I'd done radio play-by-play before, but now I'm doing it as the guy who's, calling it for a college with an unbelievable fan base. And so that was a little bit that. No, I wouldn't say, again, it's more about making sure, okay, how are we going to open this show? And if we've already pre-taped and opened, let's say we're talking about TV, how am I going to flow? I'll take it. This past Friday night did the Clemson South Carolina game, which depending on the reviews, if some reviews that I can't avoid because they pop through on Twitter, you can't miss them, but I'm the most evil, unobjective person in the world. Anyway, my apprehension on that game was simply getting from the taped open we did, from the time we came live, we kind of segue from tape to live, making sure we got in the USC batting order, Clemson in the field, talked about the pitcher, and then got to the first pitch all fluidly. So it's not that I'm nervous. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm hitting those checkpoints. And frankly, it's not an apprehensive thing. It's just, so that's the kind of thing. Any emotion I feel is just based on making sure that I, do things in the process that I need to be doing them.
That makes sense. Pete, you told me you'd give me a half hour of your time, and you gave me double that. So I doubt you'll make any mistakes at the Southern Conference tournament, but if you do, you can blame it on me.
There you go. Well, I'm in pretty good shape as far as that goes, getting ready. So very kind of you to invite me to do this. I've heard great reviews of this. I'd like to think that I'm kind of in that, side room where, that's the quiet room in the party as relative to the other guests you've had. But I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Really appreciate it. Would love to have you back.
All right, my man. We'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks to Peter. Well, I don't know if it's Peter. I think it's just Pete. Yanity, for joining us and sharing his very valuable time. Thank you to our title sponsor, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Also in Greenville, Tandem Payment. And our newest sponsor, Harris Flooring America in Anderson. Thank you to all of you for your patience over the last week and a half. Promise it won't be that long between future episodes. Actually, as I said earlier, planning on having a second one later this week, to make up for the drought last week. Everybody have a good rest of the week. We'll be back in a few days. Cheers.